Welcome to round number 7 of the World Chess Championship. This was an incredible game. Let me just go ahead and say right out of the gate here, it was extremely complicated. Now, I'm going to do my best to explain it so that everybody can follow along, but if I mess up some lines somewhere along the way, please forgive me, but I'll do my best. Let's go ahead and jump right in. The players are tied 3-3 going into this match, and here we go. Gukesh is playing with white. He plays knight to f3, called the ready opening. And a little bit of a surprise, but he's played a lot of things. We get d5, g3, g6, and we end up with what kind of looks like a King's Indian type of setup. Okay, so when I say King's Indian, we're talking about the knights on f3, the pawns on g3, the bishops on g2. This could be called like the King's Indian attack. It could be the King's Indian defense when black plays it. And so both players are kind of going with that setup. And then we have some pawns in the center, which makes a lot of sense. Castles, castles, and the move rook to e1. This was the first big surprise out of the opening. Okay, this is not a move that is really played in this position. And what's most commonly played is actually trading the pawns. And when you trade the pawns, you don't have to worry about black taking you. So you're not going to ever gambit a pawn. And then most players just continue developing. The knight comes out, and the game goes on. Usually this knight will jump into e5, something like this. But by playing rook to e1, you're basically saying, look, if you want to take me here, go ahead. It's a free pawn, but I'm going to get some counterplay. And actually, that's what black does. Ding does take the pawn. And what is the counterplay that white's going to get? Well, e4. That's why you played rook e1. We want to support e4. So he gets these two really solid pawns in the center. This d5 pawn has been moved away, and you can see how this could be dangerous. However, the question is it worth giving up a pawn? Now, in a lot of Queen's Gambit openings where you play d4, d5, and c4 immediately, you can definitely take the pawn, but it's hard to hold on to the pawn. Usually you have to just give it back, right? And if you try to hold on to it, you get into trouble. This is kind of a weird position because we've made some extra moves over here on the side to where we're not exactly in a Queen's Gambit situation. And actually, what Stockfish says is that you can hold on to this pawn. So the game continued. Bishop to g4, develops the bishop, pins the knight. Knight b to d2, attacks the pawn, also supports in the center. And right at this moment was where Stockfish says, look, the best move for black is to hold on to your pawn. Play b5, don't let white recapture it, and the game is going to go on. Probably something like h3. You can retreat this bishop here. And how exactly was Gukesh planning on proceeding? I don't know, right? But this is what Stockfish said was the best plan for black. However, Ding decided instead to play the move c5. He said, no, I don't want to, hold on to that pawn. Instead, I'm going to counterattack in the center. And Gukesh goes d5, and then we get a series of trades. Now, we'll come back to this d5 move in just a second. Let's go forward with some trades. So e6, h3 kind of forces the bishop to trade. If you don't, you're going to get trapped with g4, okay? So you have to trade at this point. And Gukesh secures the bishop pair, so he gets both of the bishops. And then we get another trade here, and then this happens. Now, let's talk about what has happened. The pawn on d5 is what we call a passed pawn, but it's also an isolated pawn. So it's a passed pawn because no pawns can stop it on the way to becoming a queen. Okay, there's no pawns that can capture it. There's no pawns blocking it. There are pieces, but that doesn't really matter. It's still considered a passed pawn. The other thing, it's an isolated pawn. There are no pawns on the adjacent files that can support it. So this is a strength and a weakness for Gukesh. It's a strength because it's a passed pawn that black has to constantly kind of pay attention to and worry about. But it's also a weakness because it's isolated. And maybe it could become a target, and at some point, maybe Ding just takes it and wins a pawn, right? So you get this very interesting position right out of the opening here. So b5, he wants to kick this annoying knight away. The knight goes back, attacks the pawn on b5, and Ding plays queen b6. Usually you want to connect your rooks after the opening, which he does, and he also defends the pawn. Makes a lot of sense. Bishop to f4. Now, we talk about the bishop pair a lot and how it's very valuable, and you can really see it in this position. These bishops are just, controlling a lot of the board, really helping this pawn threaten to push forward, and black has to be very careful. He plays rook e8. We get queen to d2. The other rook comes over. Knight comes back, and the move b4. And I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but basically he's forcing Ding to make a decision, and Ding decides to push, which Stockfish agrees with. He gets his own passed pawn. Okay, so there's no pawns that can stop this guy. It's also a protected passed pawn, so that makes a lot of sense. But it does open up this diagonal, and now his queen gets harassed by the bishop. So bishop to e3. Stockfish didn't agree with that move. It wanted just the other rook to come into the game. But after bishop e3, queen moves bishop d4, this bishop is very powerful. It's sitting in the center of the board. It's controlling a lot of squares. And Ding's position is kind of like, okay, what do I move? Like, which of my pieces can I move? What should I do? It's very difficult to figure out, right? Because white has the space. White has these powerful bishops, and so it's a tough spot to be in. And he decides to trade the rooks and grab the pawn on a2 with his queen. Now, Stockfish does not like that. Apparently, the best thing to do is just bring this knight back here, and I don't know if you're trying to get to e5 at some point, or if you're just kind of moving back and forth until white figures out what they're going to do. But Stockfish doesn't like this. Now, by doing this, the game gets very, 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 very complicated very quickly. Because now the queen is involved. White has to look out, okay, what's happening with black's queen? Is this queen going to do something to me? And then there's also the question of, wait a second, can I just trap the queen? Like, for example, if I play a move like queen c3 and try to swing my rook over, does the queen just get trapped, right? And the answer is not quite. There's queen b3, and after something like takes, you go here, you can attack the pawn, but black is doing fine. They're going to get the pawn on d5, and the game goes on, but black is okay. So that doesn't quite trap the queen. However, he plays the move rook a1 immediately, and he leaves the b3 square, but again, there's this question of like, wait a second, is the queen getting trapped? Because there's also rook a3 you have to watch out for. And at the same time, there's also this other stuff of like, well, now the rook's just controlling the a file, and the rook can maybe just invade. Do you want to do that? Right? Extremely complicated position. Now, there is a line here. So this is what happened in the game. Let me just go back to the game. So the game, queen takes a2. Gukesh did play rook to a1, and Ding played queen b3. However, there's an amazing move here for black. If you guys want to pause, instead of moving your queen, can you see any move that black could play instead? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is c3. Instead of moving your queen, you counterattack white's queen. So that they take you, you're going to take here, and now you have this annoying pawn that white has to deal with. And apparently this is slightly better for black. Bishop c3 attacks the pawn, you sacrifice it to lure the bishop away, then you grab this with your knight, and after the trade, actually black has a slight advantage, or maybe it's just equal, something like that. So that was the best move for black. See, now that's an incredible move. The other thing about this move that you have to understand is white doesn't have to take your queen. They could have also captured here, and it kind of looks like your queen is almost getting trapped again. Why would you do that? Because of knight takes d5, another move where you ignore your queen, countering again. The idea this time is if they take, you're going to take the queen. And let's just say this trade happens. I guess it's equal. Because, you know, white can get this pawn, but it's just equal, and there's not like much happening. Okay. So knight takes d5, crazy move, and then you can analyze this some more if you want. If they take you, now you take on d4, again hitting the queen constantly, and even if there's a check, you can recapture. And if you get this position, it's pretty equal as well. Okay, so all that to say that after rook a1, Ding had a really nice move c3, although it was super complicated, and it's understandable that he didn't see that. Instead, played queen b3, more natural looking move, just kind of going to the only place that you can with your queen. Rook to a3, and it looks like the queen's trapped, but it's not, because by going rook a3, you open up the first rank on b1 here, and you can check the king, and that's exactly what happens in the game. King goes up. He plays rook to d7 to defend the pawn on a7. Now, of course, it is attacked twice. So if Gukesh really wanted to, he could take the pawn, but after the trade, I just don't think there's a lot of advantage here. The queen's going to come back in the game now, and it's still relatively equal. So he finds a really nice idea here that Stockfish said was the best idea in the position. Rook to a5. And it's kind of one of those moves where if you look at the position, it's like, okay, what can black, realistically do? Well, the queen can't really move anywhere. It's basically stuck if you look carefully, right? The rook kind of has to sit here guarding this and keeping an eye on the pawn, so that's kind of stuck. The bishop is, you can't move here. You can't really move anywhere. The knight can't really move anywhere. This knight is kind of stuck because you don't have a lot of options here. If you go back, you invite, maybe there's a trade. The point is, black doesn't have a lot of moves. So when you play the move rook a5, you're just basically saying like, look, Now you have another thing that you have to defend. How are you going to do it? Right? Because if you play a6, well, then your pawn is free for the taking. If you play rook over to try to defend, look at this. I don't like the look of that. I don't know if there's an immediate tactic there. Yeah, it looks like d6 actually is a good move for white. So it's like, what do you actually do, right? So that's the situation. He plays queen b3. Gukesh actually repeats one move here. And now we are on move number 28. Okay, we're on move number 28. Remember, they have to get to move 40 before they run out of time. Ding now has 15 minutes. Now, we haven't really talked about the clocks. I actually want to go back in time for a second here. And if you go back all the way to rook to e1, remember I said this was a surprising move. Look how much time Ding spent on this. From 55 to 27. Okay, what is that? Like almost 30 minutes. Spent a lot of time. And then as the game went on, he was thinking a lot. So let's go back to the position in the game. Let's see, rook a3. Okay, so we get this position. He repeats one time. Gukesh does. He's getting a little bit closer to the time control. And you might be wondering, like, why would he repeat? When you're winning, okay, and he probably felt like he was, and he does have an advantage. When you're ahead, usually that extra time is helpful, right? Because you might be able to use the extra time that you get once you make the time control to find the winning, continuation. So repeating gets him a little bit closer to that, okay? You could also, the other argument to that would be like, well, since Ding is a little bit lower on time, maybe he shouldn't repeat, but the time has sort of evened out by this point, okay? All right, let's keep going. So rook takes b5. He finally grabs the pawn on b5 since Ding, didn't defend it by playing queen b3. Queen to d3, and he's basically saying, look, let's just trade queens. And not only do we go into an endgame, but I'm getting a tempo on your knight. After you move your knight, it's going to give me time to play d2. Now you have to worry about this. And this is a really equal position, according to Stockfish. Something like bishop takes, knight to b1 attacks the pawn. a6, I didn't even analyze this line. Bishop g5, even just to defend. The point is, it's pretty equal. And this would have been a good trade for Ding. Okay, so let's go back to the game. Queen d3. Gukesh says no thanks and plays the move queen f4. Now, queen f4 is a good move. Stockfish, for whatever reason, thought bishop e3 was the best way to decline the queen trade, because now if they take and you take, this is really good for white. I don't actually know why. Let's see. What is the idea? Basically, you have the passed pawn. This is probably a weakness, and black doesn't really have any good moves. The knight is stuck. Yeah, I guess that's what it is. So that would have been the best way to decline the queen trade. He goes queen f4. And there's an amazing move here, which was not played in the game. If you want to pause, super hard to find move, but there's a move here that black has. All right, the move is g5. This is not what was played in the game, and I don't know how you would even think about this move, but the idea is, so, okay, let me explain it this way. Queen f4 is attacking on f6, okay? So white is basically saying, look, I'm just going to try to take your piece. He's leaving his knight undefended because he wants to take on f6. So what g5 does is it says, well, you don't have time to take now because your queen's under attack. And if you take my free pawn, I'm going to play h6. And I'm trying to kick your queen away from attacking my knight. So for example, you only have like 2 squares to keep the pressure on. If you go to h4, look at this. Knight g6 actually traps the queen. The queen is totally trapped. You can't go anywhere. The knights are just amazing. So you would have to go to back to f4. But now again, the knight goes to g6. So you can see the point of that move was to clear the square for the knight. Now you kick the queen all the way back. There's no more pressure on f6. And the game goes on. You play c3. And this is, relatively equal position. Slight advantage for white. But that was the best try. g5. Crazy move, right? Ding plays a much more natural, human-looking move. And just goes for the trade. Okay, the trade of knights. So he takes the knight. And white takes on f6. And then Ding goes for queen f5, trying to trade the queens and go into the endgame. This is now move number 31, okay? 31, and Ding has 8 minutes left. So he still has quite a few moves to make with not a lot of time to do it. We get the trade, and you'll notice the pawn structure. The pawn structure is really, really bad for Ding. He's got double isolated. He's got isolated, 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 okay? Yeah, the bishop pair is going to be gone, but that's fine. The pawn structure is really bad. We get the trade. Rook to c5. This is move 34. Ding plays knight to g6. Now you'll notice this pawn on c4 is gone. Okay, there's nothing that you can do to save that guy. It's going to get lost, and so he decides now's the time to bring the knight in. He collects the pawn, and knight to e5 is played. Very natural move, putting the knight in the center, forks these pieces. Not that it's really a big deal. He just plays rook to d4, supports the pawn. Now, at this point, it is move number 36, and Ding plays knight c6. Very nice move here. And he's taking advantage of the pin. So, of course, you can't take this because you grab this. It almost looks like the pawn can get through and become a queen, but no, because the rook goes behind and you're just fine. And there's actually an interesting line here. If at this moment, Ding would have decided to bring his king to the game. Let's say he plays king f6. Let's say the bishop moves back to kind of control the knight. And now Ding tries to play knight c6, thinking, oh yeah, I got the pin. I'm going to fork this. Look at this. Takes, c7 now, going to become a queen. You can't stop it now because the bishop is controlling that square. You can't go here, and white just wins the game. So if he was going to play knight c6, he needed to play it now rather than trying to get his king in first, which he did notice. So knight c6, very nice move. And it's an annoying move because you're attacking the rook, but you're also attacking the pawn, and you're relocating your knight at the same time. All right, so rook to f4 is played, puts pressure on this pawn. Knight goes back to e7, again, putting the pressure on the pawn here. He plays the move b5, and obviously you can't take the pawn, it's defended, so he's kind of like, well, if I go back, then Ding's probably just going to repeat moves, right? That would just be a draw by repetition. Gukesh thinks he has the better position. He does. And so he doesn't want to draw. And so he has to find a different move. Therefore, he plays b5. Okay, he takes away that square from the knight. All right, this is move 38. Ding is at 7 minutes. He plays king to f6. Now he's at 4 minutes. This is his 38th move. So he still has to make 2 more moves. Gukesh plays rook to d4. We get h6. And right at this moment, this is Gukesh's 40th move, okay? This is his last move before the time control. And he actually plays a very interesting move, king to f1. Okay, he could have played rook h4, attacking this pawn, but that's a super easy decision for Ding to make. Like, oh, my pawn's attacked. I'll just go back somewhere and defend it. But by playing king f1, Ding has to make a decision. Now, this is move 40. So this is the move where Ding gets extra time, but he has 3 minutes to make this decision. And it's not an easy decision because one idea is bring your king towards the center. You attack the rook, you attack the pawn. I mean, that just looks like a supernatural move. However, another idea is moving your knight back to c8. And moving the knight back to c8 is really smart because it puts the knight on a really good square, controls this, but also gives you access to d6. And once you get your knight on d6, you're defending these pawns. And more importantly, you're blockading this pawn. And at the same time, you're putting pressure on this. It's a fantastic square for the knight. So he's got 3 minutes to make one move, and he's basically trying to decide, do I go here or do I go here? Like, what should I do? He thinks all the way down to 7 seconds on his clock. He would have lost on time if he waited another 7 seconds. And he plays the wrong move. He plays the wrong move, king e5. And, you know, if he had more time, I'm sure he would have figured this out and played knight c8. I guarantee it, right? You don't have time to analyze everything. You don't have time to calculate everything that you want to. You have to make a decision. You have 7 seconds. You're going to lose on time. He played king e5. And from a human standpoint, I mean, like, the natural instinct is like, yeah, move your king to the center. It's the end of the game. You want your king to be in the center. It's with a tempo. It's attacking the rook. You're putting pressure on the pawn. Like, why would you not play that? Well, here's the problem. Rook to h4. This is what Gukesh played. And the issue is you're not going to be able to hold on to your pawns. So, for example, rook to d6 trying to defend, then the rook swings back over here to attack this guy. And if you go with your rook to defend, then the rook sneaks up to a6, and look at this. Everything is being attacked. And you can't defend it. I actually guess technically you can defend it with your knight, or you could block, but that's not good because h4, h5 is going to chase you away. And if you try to defend it here, I mean, your knight's going the wrong way. d6, sacrificing. Why is this such a good move here? Let me try to understand. Somehow this is really powerful. I guess because the knight's so far away from the passed pawn, that's why it's super dangerous. Okay, so that was one example. Another example, let's go back here. After rook h4, if you try to defend this way, you could also try to use your knight here, but then the rook sneaks over to c4, and it's hitting your knight. And when you move, boom, the rook is coming in here. And if you lose this pawn and then this is a threat, you're in big trouble. So that was pretty complicated, but the point was he has no way to defend everything once the rook starts invading. Okay, and that was why king e5 was the wrong decision, because going back, if you play knight c8 here, this doesn't do anything. You just slide your king over. You just defend that. If he attacks your knight, who cares? Once you get this set up with black, it's very likely you're going to be able to get a draw and hold on, right? That's all he needed to do. Obviously, easier said than done. I'm looking at it with Stockfish telling me everything. Okay, so back to the game. King e5, rook h4. Because he probably at this point realized, okay, I can't actually hold on to everything, he decided to abandon the h6 pawn and instead take on d5. Okay, now this is really dangerous for Ding for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a passed pawn. Number two, it's a flank pawn. Okay, h pawns and a pawns are flank pawns, and they are very, very dangerous against knights. Knights are notoriously bad at stopping flanked pawns because you don't have a lot of board to work with. Knights have to be able to kind of jump around, but on the edge of the board you can't, and so it's very difficult for the knights. Okay, so that's not good news for Ding at this point. He plays knight to c3. He's trying to create counterplay, and there's a possibility that when he played king e5, maybe he was looking at this line, and he was expecting that Gukesh was going to play bishop c6, which attacks the rook, defends the pawn, and he thought, okay, this is fine. I'm going to go check. King's going to move. I'm going to go rook d2. I have a lot of counterplay. Maybe I'll swing over here and get behind. Maybe I'll jump my knight in and attack here. Maybe I'll push this pawn and trade it. And maybe he thought, like, this is going to be a good position for me. However, Gukesh didn't play that. He played instead rook to c6, which attacks the knight, and it still defends the pawn. Do you guys see how? Do you see how rook c6 defends this against this move? Well, hopefully you noticed rook to c5 is a fork, and if you think you can block and defend your knight, you're wrong because, well, it's just defended by the bishop. You just take it. So that is why you can't actually take this. So rook c6, very, very nice move, threatening the knight. He plays knight to e4, centralizing it, and Gukesh plays king to e1. Now, this was not the right move, and I guess he was probably worried about the rook coming in, and so he didn't want to play, a move like h4 because he thought maybe this rook was coming here is going to cause him problems. But that's not really a big deal. I mean, yes, it attacks here, but you just trade, and rook c7, you're just winning too many pawns. Like, black just doesn't have enough counterplay, right? And so this was the way that he should have gone, h4. He's probably going to win the game. I guess got a little bit overly concerned about what black was trying to do on d2, and he spent time playing king e1. But this gives Ding time to figure out something to do, and he plays the move f6. Now, at first glance, f6 is like, wait a second, what is happening with f6? This is what I think is going on. He's opening up the rook to come over to the h-file. And as an example, let's say he would have played instead, let's just say rook to d5. Backs the pawn. And let's say white defends. And then let's say he tries to play f4 to trade off one of his bad pawns. What's going to happen here is g4. And once you push by like this, guess what? These guys are going, and black just doesn't really have anything. Their position is just kind of not that great. By playing f6... he is now, for example, let's say white plays bishop e2. He is now threatening f4. He wants to trade off one of his bad pawns, and if you try to push by, look at this. The rook now can swing over and attack the pawn. Okay, so very, very clever move there by giving his rook the option to come over to the h-file. Okay, all right, so back to the game. After f6, Gukesh plays the move h4. Ding plays rook to d3, attacking the bishop. We get bishop to d1, which is not the correct move according to Stockfish. Stockfish said you had to play either bishop e2 or king e2, and I'm not going to get into all the complications of why, but apparently bishop d1 wasn't quite the right decision. f4, trying to trade off one of his bad pawns. This is a good strategy that you can use in your games. If you have doubled pawns like this, their weaknesses, their targets, they're not very good. If you ever have the opportunity to push them forward and trade for one of your opponent's good pawns, if you can accomplish that trade, it's going to help your position. So that's what we're seeing here. He takes the pawn, the king comes up, and another key point here, at the end of the game, even if you're losing, the more active that you can get your pieces, the better chances you have of holding on for a draw or maybe even going for a win. And that's what we see Ding doing a really good job of. His king started way back here, is now all the way up here. And I mean, look at white's king. It's still on the back, the back rank here, or the first rank. And if you can't go there, but The point is, as these pieces get closer and closer to the king, white has to be more and more careful because there are checkmating nets that can happen with the rook, a knight, and a king. There are tactics that can pop up, right? And so Ding is doing a great job of really trying to hold on, even though he's down a pawn in this endgame. Okay? So there's a really interesting line here that I think Gukesh missed, okay? And it goes like this. Rook to c4 is probably what he thought he could play in this position. And the reason rook c4 is such a powerful move is because you're threatening to take the knight. Okay, so for example, if let's see, what can black play? I don't know. What's a random move that black can play? Let's say you move your rook. Actually, wait a second. What was I going to show you guys? Yeah, let's just say you play king e5. He's threatening to take the knight. Once you take, he's going to pin you. Okay, and then you have to try to get away, but he's going to trade. And this trade results in a win for white because this pawn just goes. Okay, you can't catch it. So that's the idea behind rook to c4. You're pinning the knight. You're threatening to simply capture it next move. The other thing is if the rook tries to, let's just say, leave to get away from the tactic, you walk into f3. f3 is, the knight is pinned. So you're just going to lose a knight. And going back here, defending your knight doesn't help you. Same thing, f3, right? Your knight is lost. Okay, so this move, rook to c4, was a great idea. However, it doesn't work because of the amazing move rook to h3. And yes, you can still play f3 and go for the pin. But look at this, rook to h1 check. Notice the knight is taking away these squares. So you have to move to e2. And then he's just going to keep checking you back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And some of you are probably thinking, wait a second, Nelson, the king can actually just escape and run away, right? Wrong. That is checkmate in one move. Look at this beautiful checkmate. The rook is just controlling all of these. The knight is here. The king is helping. That would be a sad way to lose the game, right? Especially if you're a grandmaster. Anyway, that didn't happen. But the point of all of what I just said is that you can't really play rook c4 unless you have a way to meet rook h3, right? It's an amazing response. So because of that, Gukesh thought for a while, actually thought for a long time, and now he's getting low on time. Now, at this point, you have to understand there is a 30-second bonus time that's added every time they make a move. So you play a move, 30 seconds gets added to your clock. You play a move, 30 seconds gets added to your clock. That being said, that's it. That's all the time you have. So the rest of the game, Gukesh kind of has to make quick decisions. I mean, he has 1 minute. So he can use the minute, and then he gets that 30-second time. That's it. So he goes bishop c2, trying to somehow create problems still for Ding. The rook moves. And now he plays rook c4. So there is no rook going to h3 and sneaking down because he chased it away first. The problem is that black can now just play f5, which he does, because remember the f3 idea of attacking the knight? Well, you can't do that anymore. The king just takes it because the bishop's no longer there supporting it. So that's the issue. That's the problem that Gukesh now is facing. Okay, so f5 is played. He goes rook b4, putting the rook behind the pawn, trying to still create problems. He does have this h-pawn that Ding has to watch out for. King to f3. Again, he's being very active with his king. He's putting the pressure on Gukesh's position. Bishop check, king g2. Again, just continuing to be annoying with the king. Rook goes back. He plays rook e5. This is dangerous. Gukesh has to be careful because now you're in what's a potential discovered check, right? If this knight moves somewhere, there's check with the rook, which means this knight can really move to wherever it wants to, which is a very dangerous position to be in. He goes with f4 because now if you move your knight somewhere, let's just say you try to go here to win the rook because of the check, well, he's just going to take your rook, and this is just a trade, and then you actually lose your knight, and you lose the game. So f4, nice move, trying to fight on, low in time pressure, obviously. Ding goes back. He brings the rook over, so he gets away from that discovered check, also pins the knight at the same time. Ding plays rook h7, goes after the h-pawn, and you'll notice that there's not a lot of options for Gukesh to defend it, right? The king's not in a good position, the rook can't do anything, so the only way to defend that is to play h5 and use the bishop. However, knight to f6, and he's attacking it twice, and how are you going to defend that if you are Gukesh? Well, you can't, so he counters the f-pawn instead, and we get the trade of pawns. Knight comes into g3. Rook goes down to f8. And basically at this point, Ding is just trying to win one more of these pawns because if he can win one more of these pawns, basically he can always sacrifice his piece for the pawn at the end. And if we ended up with a rook and a bishop against a... Actually, I don't actually know the answer to this question. So maybe somebody can let me know in the comments. I should have looked it up, but I didn't think about it until just this moment. If we end up with, like, let's say this pawn gets traded, this knight gets sacrificed, and we end up with a king and a rook and a bishop against a king and a rook, I think that position is a draw. I could be wrong. And like I said, I'd have to look it up. I don't actually know, so I apologize for not knowing the answer to that. But probably that would be hard to win. Anyway, let's keep going. So he's just trying to like pick off these pawns somehow, basically is Ding's strategy. Bishop to a4 defends the pawn. King to f3. So he's attacking the pawn. It's defended now and it actually gets pushed. He attacks it again. So now there's two attackers, but it gets pushed again. And you might think, wait a second, he's not going to catch it in time, right? The problem is whenever it gets to here, notice this rook. The rook is always going to be threatening it. And if you just try to move your rook out of the way, well, then you just lose the pawn. So it's not that simple for Gukesh, right? That's kind of the problem. And so that's why all Ding really has to do is just keep attacking it. He brings a knight. He's going to bring his king again somewhere. And bishop comes back. Knight goes back here, which is now attacking this pawn as well. Rook attacks it. King goes to e5, defends the knight, attacks the pawn. And Gukesh is running out of options, right? He's trying. He knew he had a winning position at some point, and he's just trying to keep the hope alive. He goes bishop b3. But at this point, Ding has the perfect blockade. There's not really going to be anything that you can do. He throws in the check, takes the pawn, and then after the rooks are traded, the only thing that Ding has to do is sacrifice his knight for the pawn. It's a guaranteed draw. And that's exactly what he does. Doesn't matter that this pawn is going to get captured. You can't checkmate with only a king and a bishop. And after a6, king takes a6, the game is a draw. Wow. This was a 72 move game. We had time pressure situations. We had one player was winning. Then it was, the draw. There were some chances here. Tactical, super complicated. I don't even feel like I understood half of what was going on in this game, to be honest with you guys. So I hope that it made sense to you, because it was one of those very, very complicated games. A lot of fun to watch. The time scrambles are always interesting. And we are still tied. So I think that's got to be a huge win psychologically for Ding, to be able to come from a position where he was really should have probably lost, to hold on, to really fight back and get the draw. Really well played by Ding. And I wonder how it's going to affect Gukesh psychologically. When you have a winning position and then you don't win, that can be very tough. So I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. I'll see you tomorrow for round number 8. And yeah, thanks for watching. Stay sharp. Play smart. Take care.